December 19th, 1944, Verdun, France. 16 senior Allied commanders occupied a frigid chamber. 50 miles to the north, the Battle of the Bulge raged, representing the United States Army's most extensive engagement ever. The 101st Airborne Division found itself encircled at Bastogne. General Eisenhower posed the question, "When can you launch an offensive?" Field Marshal Montgomery replied, "Within a week." Others suggested 10 days. General Patton rose. "I can advance with 3 divisions in 48 hours." A hush fell over the room. General Bradley, observing his old comrade, wondered if Patton had lost his senses. It seemed unattainable. Patton's entire Third Army was positioned to the east, poised for an incursion into Germany. Reaching Bastogne would necessitate a 90-degree turn for 250,000 soldiers, undertaken during the most severe winter in decades, and an uphill assault against formidable German armor. Yet on December 26th, just 7 days later, Patton's armored columns breached the German lines, arriving in Bastogne. General Bradley would later utter words he would forever cherish. This is that account. The evening of December 18th, 1944, Lieutenant General Omar Nelson Bradley, at his 12th Army Group headquarters in Luxembourg City, pored over reconnaissance reports, his concern mounting. For 2 days, German forces had been surging through the Ardennes forest, a region previously deemed impregnable, where Allied intelligence had assured him no significant offensive was feasible. These assurances were now tragically disproven. The magnitude of the German assault was astounding. Over 200,000 German soldiers, supported by nearly 1,000 tanks, had breached the thinly held American Fifth Corps sector. Units were dispersed, communication channels severed, and command and control structures were disintegrating. Some American divisions had simply dissolved under the relentless pressure. Others fought valiantly as they withdrew westward. Bradley reached for the telephone and dialed Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., commander of the Third Army to the south. Their conversation would become legendary, later depicted in films, though none could truly convey the palpable tension of that moment. "Brad, I've established a bridgehead across the Saar," Patton began with evident enthusiasm. "I'm on my way into Germany." The Third Army had been relentlessly attacking German fortifications for weeks, finally achieving a breakthrough. Patton was preparing to capitalize on this success with the swift, armored thrusts that had earned him renown across France in August. "Hold on a moment, George," Bradley interrupted. "There's significant trouble to the north," he explained the grim reality. A massive German offensive had overwhelmed entire divisions, causing the front lines to collapse. Bradley urgently needed Patton to dispatch his 10th Armored Division northward immediately to help stabilize the precarious situation. Patton expressed his reservations. Without the 10th Armored, he could not exploit his breakthrough at Saarbrücken. All the efforts of the Third Army over the past month would be rendered futile. But Bradley was adamant. The situation was critical. General Eisenhower had summoned all senior commanders to Verdun for an emergency conference the following morning. After concluding the call, Patton took an action that would prove instrumental. Despite his frustration, he recognized that the German offensive might be more than a mere spoiling attack. His intelligence officer, Colonel Oskar Koch, had repeatedly cautioned for weeks about German troop concentrations opposite the Ardennes. Patton had previously dismissed concerns regarding his own sector, as the Third Army faced south and east not north. However, Koch's analytical methods were sound. Patton summoned his staff. "The Germans have launched a major offensive through the Ardennes," he informed them. "Eisenhower wants us at Verdun tomorrow morning. I suspect we'll be ordered to turn north and attack the German flank." His staff officers exchanged incredulous glances. Turn north? The entirety of the Third Army was oriented towards the east and south. A 90-degree pivot while maintaining combat effectiveness would be exceptionally challenging. "Commence planning," Patton commanded. "I require 3 distinct strategies. Firstly, an offensive northward with 3 divisions. Secondly, an attack involving 4 divisions. Thirdly, an assault employing 6 divisions. Have them prepared by morning." His staff believed he was being overly optimistic. Surely Eisenhower would not mandate such a drastic reorientation so rapidly. However, Patton grasped a fundamental principle that his peers often overlooked. In the realm of mobile warfare, tempo eclipses meticulous preparation. The German offensive presented both a crisis for the Allied forces caught in its path and a strategic opportunity for a powerful counterattack against the German flank. If the Third Army could pivot northward with sufficient speed, Patton could strike the German forces while they were overextended and concentrated on their westward advance. Throughout that night, Third Army staff officers toiled ceaselessly. They meticulously studied maps of the Ardennes region, charted road networks, calculated fuel requirements, and drafted movement directives. The logistical undertaking was immense. Relocating hundreds of thousands of soldiers, tens of thousands of vehicles, and vast quantities of supplies at a 90-degree angle under winter conditions seemed almost insurmountable. Meanwhile, General Bradley grappled with his own crisis of confidence. As commander of the 12th Army Group, the responsibility for the Ardennes sector ultimately rested upon him. He had accepted intelligence assessments that deemed the area unsuitable for significant German operations. He had stationed inexperienced divisions there, believing it to be a quiet sector where raw troops could safely gain combat experience. These decisions now appeared catastrophically misguided. On December 19, 1944, at 11 o'clock in the morning, the conference room at Fort Drian, Verdun, was uncomfortably cold. 16 senior Allied commanders, clad in heavy coats, sat with their breath misting in the frigid air. Supreme Commander General Dwight David Eisenhower commenced the proceedings with his characteristic directness. "The current situation is to be viewed as an opportunity for us, not a disaster." The assertion seemed improbable. German forces had carved a significant salient into Allied lines, hence the battle's eventual moniker. American casualties were escalating with each passing hour. Units were scattered across the Ardennes. Communications remained chaotic. Yet Eisenhower's strategic intuition was prescient. The German offensive had depleted their reserves from defensive positions. If Allied forces could halt the advance and launch a counterattack, they might succeed in trapping and annihilating substantial German formations. Eisenhower outlined the German objective: to cross the Meuse River, seize Antwerp, and bisect the Allied forces. The town of Bastogne, a crucial crossroads where 7 major roadways converged, was central to German strategic aims. The 101st Airborne Division, rapidly deployed from reserve, had reached Bastogne mere hours before German forces encircled it. Now the paratroopers, along with elements of the 10th Armored Division and other scattered units, were under siege. "We must hold Bastogne," Eisenhower declared. The Germans required those roads. Denying them Bastogne would impede their entire offensive. But holding the town meant relieving the besieged garrison before their ammunition, food, and medical supplies were exhausted. Eisenhower then addressed Patton. "George, how soon can you advance northward with a substantial force?" What transpired next entered military lore. Patton stood and approached the situation map. "I can attack with 3 divisions on December 22nd, he stated plainly. 48 hours from now. The room erupted. Several commanders chuckled, assuming Patton was jesting or posturing. British officers rolled their eyes, perceiving it as classic American bravado. Even Bradley harbored skepticism. He was aware of Patton's propensity for optimistic predictions and assertive pronouncements. "When can you commence?" Eisenhower pressed, seeking a realistic assessment. "The morning of December 22nd, Patton reiterated, "with 3 divisions, the 4th Armored, the 26th Infantry, and the 80th Infantry. Bradley's chief of staff leaned in and whispered, "He's bluffing. It's impossible." But Patton was not bluffing. While his staff had toiled through the night preparing contingency plans, Patton had already made his decision. He would implement the 3-division assault plan, with the 4th Armored Division spearheading the advance, supported by 2 infantry divisions providing flank protection. The objective was to drive northward from the vicinity of Arlon, break through German lines south of Bastogne, and relieve the 101st Airborne. Bradley, knowing Patton intimately, recognized the seriousness of his intent. They had been friends since their West Point days and had served together for decades. Patton did not make commitments he could not honor, particularly in combat operations. Yet, even with his understanding of Patton's capabilities, Bradley found the timeline almost unbelievable. "That's a formidable undertaking, George," Bradley remarked cautiously. Patton's response was characteristic. "We will achieve it. My staff already has movement orders prepared. Units are standing by for execution. We will attack on the 22nd. Montgomery, commanding the 21st Army Group north of the Bulge, stated he could initiate his counteroffensive no earlier than January 1st. He required time to meticulously organize substantial forces and ensure adequate supplies. This methodical approach was typical of Montgomery: thorough, careful, and disinclined to engage until all elements were perfectly in place. The contrast could not have been more pronounced. Montgomery needed 2 weeks. Patton promised 48 hours. Eisenhower, navigating the disparity between British caution and American assertiveness, made his decision. Patton would launch his offensive south of the Bulge on December 22nd. Montgomery would orchestrate the northern counteroffensive for early January. As the conference concluded, Bradley drew Patton aside. "George, you must deliver on this. The entire Allied command structure just heard you promise the impossible." Patton's reply was succinct. "I will be in Bastogne by Christmas." December 19th through 21st, 1944. What followed was one of the most extraordinary military maneuvers in American history. The Third Army comprised approximately 250,000 soldiers and over 130,000 vehicles, actively engaged in combat operations against German forces to the east and south. Now it had to disengage, execute a 90-degree pivot, and launch an offensive northward. all while maintaining combat effectiveness under the harshest winter conditions experienced in 38 years. The logistical challenges were immense. Roads in the region were narrow, icy, and congested with military traffic moving in multiple directions. Fuel convoys had to navigate the same routes as combat units. Artillery battalions needed to relocate from their firing positions along the Saar to new emplacements facing north. Communication networks required a complete overhaul. Supply depots established for eastward operations had to be abandoned or relocated. Patton's staff worked around the clock. Movement orders were disseminated to every division, regiment, and battalion. Engineers prepared routes, marking them with signs to prevent units from becoming lost amidst the confusion. Military police were stationed at critical intersections to direct traffic. Fuel depots were established along the routes to sustain vehicle movement. The weather was unforgiving. Temperatures plummeted below freezing. Snow mixed with freezing rain created treacherous road conditions. Soldiers accustomed to fighting in relatively dry environments to the south now faced the full ferocity of the Ardennes winter. Vehicles succumbed to the cold. Frostbite and trench foot became immediate threats. But Patton's reputation for stringent discipline and intensive training paid dividends. Third Army units executed their movement orders with remarkable efficiency. Unit commanders understood that speed was paramount, more so than perfect positioning. Deploying forces swiftly into action was preferable to waiting for absolute perfection. The 4th Armored Division, designated as the Spearhead, commenced its northward movement on December 19th. This battle-hardened formation had fought its way across France since the Normandy breakout. Its soldiers were seasoned, its leaders competent, and its equipment meticulously maintained. However, even the 4th Armored had never undertaken an operation of this magnitude, traversing over 100 miles in winter conditions before immediately engaging prepared German defenses. The 26th Infantry Division, under the command of Major General Willard Paul, followed. This division had endured intense fighting in Lorraine and suffered considerable casualties. Yet its soldiers were resilient and determined. Bringing up the rear was the 80th Infantry Division, led by Major General Horace McBride, another experienced unit that had earned Patton's respect through tenacious combat. By December 21st, all 3 divisions were in position south of Bastogne. They had covered distances ranging from 75 to over 150 miles, depending on their original locations. The movement had been accomplished within 48 to 72 hours, precisely as Patton had promised. General Bradley, observing from 12th Army Group headquarters, was astonished. He had doubted Patton's ability to fulfill his commitment. Now, 3rd Army forces were positioned to attack on schedule, despite challenges that should have rendered the operation impossible. On December 22nd, Patton's forces launched their northward assault. The 4th Armored Division spearheaded the attack, advancing towards Bastogne through heavily fortified German positions. The engagement was immediately intense. German forces, caught off guard by the Americans' swift response, had nonetheless established formidable defenses south of Bastogne. They recognized that relieving the besieged garrison would jeopardize their entire offensive. The weather continued to impede operations. Fog, snow, and overcast skies prevented air support. Artillery struggled to maintain fire support while repositioning forward. Infantry advanced through frozen woodlands where German defenders had prepared ambush sites. Tank engagements erupted on icy roadways where maneuverability was severely restricted. Progress was measured in hundreds of yards, sometimes less. Villages transformed into strongholds, requiring meticulous clearance of every building. German counterattacks struck American flanks. Casualties mounted, but Third Army forces maintained their offensive momentum. They did not pause to consolidate or reorganize. They attacked, advanced, and attacked again. December 23rd through 26th, 1944. Within Bastogne, the situation grew increasingly dire. Brigadier General Anthony Clement McAuliffe, acting commander of the 101st Airborne Division, sustained morale through sheer force of personality and the inherent resilience of his paratroopers. When German commanders issued a surrender ultimatum on December 22nd, McAuliffe's one-word reply, "Nuts," became legendary. However, legendary responses did not resolve the garrison's fundamental predicaments. Dwindling ammunition, scarce medical supplies, and wounded soldiers requiring evacuation. On December 23rd, the weather finally cleared. Allied air power, grounded for days by fog and overcast conditions, struck German positions with devastating effect. Hundreds of C-47 transport aircraft dropped vital supplies to the Bastogne garrison. Paratroopers rushed to retrieve containers filled with ammunition, rations, and medical provisions. Spirits soared. They were not abandoned, yet relief remained contingent on Patton's advance. South of Bastogne, the 4th Armored Division pressed forward against tenacious German resistance. The division was organized into 3 combat commands. Small, adaptable task forces integrating tanks, infantry, and artillery. Combat Command B, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Williams Abrams, Jr., spearheaded the main thrust. Abrams was a quintessential tanker, aggressive, skilled, and fearless. His soldiers placed their complete trust in him. On December 26th, Abrams received orders to break through to Bastogne at any cost. He assembled a task force comprising elements of the 37th Tank Battalion's Company C and the 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion. The objective? Drive directly up the road from Assenois to Bastogne, approximately 4 miles, overcoming any German resistance encountered. The assault commenced at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sherman tanks, infantry half-tracks, and supporting vehicles charged up the road in a column. German forces, surprised by the boldness of the assault, retaliated with anti-tank fire and small arms. American tanks fired while on the move, suppressing German positions. Infantry cleared buildings and strongholds. The column advanced relentlessly. At 4:50 p.m., Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding the lead tank, Cobra King, approached Bastogne's perimeter. He stood in his turret hatch, waving an orange identification panel. Soldiers of the 326th Airborne Engineer Battalion, manning positions on the perimeter, recognized the American tanks advancing from the south. They had been relieved. News spread instantaneously throughout Bastogne. The 101st Airborne, besieged for 7 days, was no longer isolated. Within hours, supply convoys began entering the town. Wounded soldiers were evacuated. Fresh ammunition arrived. The relief operation had succeeded. When Bradley received confirmation that Patton's forces had broken through to Bastogne, his reaction was complex. Pride in the American soldier's accomplishment intertwined with relief that the audacious operation had succeeded, but also profound amazement at what Patton had achieved. In 7 days, not the 48 hours promised for the attack to commence, but an astonishingly brief period nonetheless, Patton had reoriented an entire army, fought through entrenched German defenses, and relieved a besieged garrison that many had feared would be overrun. Bradley contacted Patton directly. The conversation was brief. "George, congratulations, you did it. The 101st didn't require rescuing. They were doing just fine. We simply opened the door so they could continue the fight." This exchange encapsulated the nuanced relationship between the 101st Airborne and Patton's relief force. The paratroopers bristled at any suggestion they had been rescued. They had defended Bastogne against overwhelming odds, repelled multiple German assaults, and maintained their combat effectiveness throughout the siege. McAuliffe's defiant "nuts" response embodied their indomitable spirit. But the practical reality was undeniable. Without Patton's relief, the garrison would have eventually been overwhelmed or compelled to surrender. Ammunition was nearly depleted. Medical supplies were critically low. German forces surrounding the town significantly outnumbered the defenders. The siege could not have continued indefinitely. December 27, 1944, through January 1945. The relief of Bastogne did not mark the end of the battle. For 3 additional weeks, fierce fighting persisted around the town as German forces attempted to recapture it and Allied forces worked to eliminate the entire salient. However, the symbolic and strategic significance of Bastogne's relief was immediate and profound. Bradley's assessment of Patton's achievement evolved in the days following the breakthrough. In his personal notes and later in his memoirs, Bradley reflected on the Third Army's accomplishment. His commentary revealed both astute military judgment and a deep personal understanding of Patton's exceptional capabilities. "George accomplished it better and more rapidly than I had any right to expect," Bradley wrote. This was high commendation from a commander known for his understated expressions. Bradley acknowledged that Patton's 48-hour promise referred to the initiation of the attack, not the completion of the relief. But even accounting for that distinction, the speed of the Third Army's response was extraordinary. What most impressed Bradley was not merely the swiftness of the movement, but the combat effectiveness maintained throughout the operation. The Third Army did not simply rush north in disarray. It executed a coordinated maneuver that preserved unit cohesion, maintained command and control, and deployed forces ready for immediate combat upon arrival. This necessitated exceptional staff work, experienced leadership, and thoroughly trained soldiers. Bradley also recognized the operational risks Patton had assumed. By committing 3 divisions to the Bastogne relief, the Third Army had weakened its positions facing east and south. German forces could have launched counterattacks against the Third Army's exposed flanks. Supply lines were stretched precariously thin. Had the relief failed, or had German forces launched successful counterattacks elsewhere, Patton would have faced severe censure. However, Patton had correctly calculated that speed was more critical than perfect security. In mobile warfare, tempo and initiative often supersede caution. By attacking swiftly, the Third Army seized the initiative from German forces still preoccupied with their westward advance. The psychological impact alone was considerable. German adversaries found themselves compelled to redirect focus and vital assets to confront the onslaught of the Third Army, thereby diminishing the strength of their primary offensive. On the 14th of January, 1945, General Eisenhower journeyed to Bastogne to bestow accolades upon the brave individuals who had fiercely protected the town. Among those honored was Brigadier General McAuliffe, who was presented with the Distinguished Service Cross. General Patton was present at this solemn occasion, as was General Bradley. The press was on hand, and photographers meticulously documented the events. Images were captured of Patton bestowing medals upon airborne troops, engaging in conversation with McAuliffe, and surveying the devastation wrought upon the town. Following the ceremony, Bradley drew Patton aside. Their discussion was confidential, yet Patton made a note in his personal journal of Bradley's sentiments. Bradley conveyed to me that the Third Army's swift intervention at Bastogne represented the most masterful maneuver of the entire conflict. He opined that future historians would dedicate significant study to this event for numerous generations. This was exceptionally high commendation coming from Bradley, who was not one for exaggeration. As the commander of the 12th Army Group, he held supreme authority over all American land operations throughout Europe. He had personally witnessed every major engagement from the shores of Normandy all the way to the German frontier. For him to declare Bastogne the paramount strategic triumph of the war underscored a profound and genuine professional regard. Bradley's public pronouncements, while more reserved, carried an equivalent weight of praise. During press briefings, he consistently highlighted the Third Army's accomplishment as a testament to the American soldiers' capacity for rapid deployment and tenacious offensive actions under the most challenging circumstances. His commendations extended beyond Patton, encompassing the entirety of the Third Army's leadership, its staff officers, and most particularly the rank-and-file soldiers who had executed the demanding mission amidst harrowing conditions. Years later, with the cessation of hostilities, Bradley offered a more reflective and philosophical perspective on Patton's decisive relief of Bastogne. In his widely read memoir, A Soldier's Story, he articulated, "Perhaps Patton's most defining moment arrived during that exceptional response to the German penetration in the Ardennes. He pivoted an entire army with incredible alacrity, propelled it through abysmal weather into ferocious combat, and delivered precisely what he had pledged." The dynamic between Bradley and Patton was multifaceted, encompassing a long-standing friendship, professional rivalry, and leadership styles that diverged significantly. Bradley was characterized by his systematic, cautious, and diplomatic approach. Patton, conversely, was known for his aggressive, impulsive, and often blunt demeanor. Nevertheless, at Bastogne, Patton's distinctive attributes yielded outcomes that effectively validated Bradley's unwavering conviction in maintaining him in command, despite a history of recurrent controversies. The valiant stand of the 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne, coupled with the Third Army's rescue mission, evolved into one of the war's most lauded narratives. It underscored American fortitude, adaptability in tactical execution, and the indispensable role of bold leadership. For Bradley, it served as a confirmation of his profound trust in Patton's prowess as a combat commander. For Patton, it represented a form of vindication following the highly publicized slapping incidents and a period of professional marginalization. For the fighting men of both Allied forces, it stood as irrefutable evidence that they possessed the capability to contend with and overcome Germany's elite forces under the most arduous conditions imaginable.